Informal. We're going to sit down really because we're tired and our legs hurt. Want to make it look like an interview, but really we're tired. Okay, guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started. There was quite a few things that came out of the, in fact, there was enough key points that we had to kind of prioritize. We don't want to keep you here too late. We know traffic starts getting bad closer to 4, but this is some good stuff, and we're going to try to go through it as quick as we can. And there was a lot of things, like I know that I had explained in different ones, and so it's going to be good that we're going to ask this in front of the group, and y'all can actually, y'all act like representatives. We got to have that door prizes next time, Dr. Bo. Yeah, we missed that part, and everybody has to go, oh, my dog's sick and everything else. Okay, so first question, Dr. Weld. There was questions and concerns of how does communication work in regards to all across the state, and there also was a component that was, who keeps tabs on that? Who actually, is there a database? Is there a directory? And is the regional STEM director the one responsible for entering that? Basically, explain to us how that database or how y'all keep track of things and communicate things.
Okay, I'll claim some expertise here, although everybody here is officially deputized to help me out with any of this. But we do have the voice of experience, and like I said, replicating models from other states. So it's all ultimately communication, right? This entire STEM movement across the nation is about getting the word and communicating and finding gems and broadening those gems' impacts and opportunities. And I will say as a start, the Iowa State University did something exceedingly useful for us in the earliest days of the STEM Council. They did a social network analysis, a scholarly enterprise that a department at that university was particularly good at. And they said, we'll do one for you. They won't call it a social network analysis, they will call it a professional network analysis. And by doing so, they asked me and other identifiable STEM leaders in the state, the so-called movers and shakers of the state, maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, to list all the people we knew in the STEM community of our state. And we all did, and they took it all and they put it through some algorithms and asked those people who else they knew and those people who else they knew, and on this scholarly enterprise went. It ended up getting published in some obscure academic journal that I'm happy to shoot to you if you're interested. But what came out of that was a priceless and aesthetically beautiful graphic of lines, dots, different size dots, different colored dots, and each dot was a person, and this was all on a computer, so you could pass your cursor over dots and lines, and you'd find out who the people are, what they do. The bigger their dot, the more connections they had, as others had reported. And this network analysis was sent out to the 6 regions because these people span the state of Iowa. And the charge to this nascent group of regional managers was, here on a silver platter are the people of STEM in your midst. And they all got contacted and they all got brought under the tent through this network analysis. So I recommend that. And then what's come since is not rocket science in any sense. It's a lot of communicating. And a communications specialist you saw was on my staff of 5, and she's critical as so much of the communicated storytelling, the effects that we're having, the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing in terms of one region and another, all comes down to this immensely talented young woman named Lindy. But most of my job, it seems, is communication. I have, as you probably do too, multiple telecoms per week, and we have these stratified by which every week I'm on the phone with our co-chairs, the governor and her co-chair. I also have a weekly call with a person who is the board chair of each of the 6 regional boards. I have a weekly call with the hub institution supervisors, also known as principal investigators. So these are some of the phone calls. There's an evaluation consortium we talk with every week. Each of those regional boards has a communications designee that Lindy convenes every week. Multiple layers of constant communication by sector, by sense of responsibility, so that hopefully no sector is left untouched. There's still some absence and some gaps in the communication landscape, but that's inevitable.
And I think that's a great strategy. I might have to get that software platform so we can see the big dots.
Yeah.
Were you a pretty big dot on that?
I did turn out to be a big dot, and I was really humbled by that.
Well, and to finish up that second part, do you all have a directory, and who kind of keeps tabs on that? Or where's this centralized location of what's going on in the state?
Right. Well, now that we have the luxury of these 6 regional managers, they have a performance expectation roster of 8, scope of work of maybe 8 duties for which they're responsible. And me and my associate director are their supervisors, co-supervisors with their institution supervisors. So twice a year, we all sit down in a room together and we talk about what kind of year they're having so far. And one of the metrics they're asked to attest to is the connections they've made. So I literally get this Excel spreadsheet twice a year from each of these 6 people, and there's different columns: higher education, K-12, pre-K-12, informal, industry, policy, nonprofit, and I can see how active they are in reaching out. Their role is principally an intermediary to make connections, to continue connecting all those dots, and they do so beautifully. And if they're not as active as I think, I can say, I can see in the industry sector, you're a little light. Can you in the coming 6 months, can we help you identify more leads and contacts in the world of industry and manufacturing? Others a little light in the higher ed. It's so dependent on personalities, right? Some of these folks came out of K-12 and they're killing it with teachers, and they're a little lacking with industry. Others came out of that sector and they're a little scared to go into schools. So it's a constant journey, but it's a constant update, and it's a measured expectation.
Great. I really like that. There was a few things you said that I'm like taking notes. Communication beyond the top down. How there's questions. How can first off, how can there be some representation for each region, not just higher ed, not just pre-K to 12? What's the accountability measure to make sure everybody can come to the table? And not only that, how do you ensure that people in the trenches, this was a question they had or a concern. In other words, it's not just a bunch of administrators who are not communicating to maybe the teachers or the workers that are 9 to 5 and different things like that. So can you tell us how to ensure that communication?
Well, ensure is a big ask, but I can tell you how we chip away at it.
Okay.
So each of these 6 regional managers has an assigned advisory board. And this is Organization 101, you saw it in the chart. And each of the seats around the table, quite literally like yours, are convened monthly. And I try to attend as many of the regional board meetings as I can, but principally it's up to that manager. Each of those chairs was determined by a working group of the STEM Council early on. That first year or two was so wildly pioneering. I mean, we had to imagine everything from evaluation to communication to organization to programming and staffing. And one of the working groups talked about how do we implement this at the regional level without being too heavy-handed and too top-down and emanating from the state capitol. And the answer was, let's put a board around each of these 6 people, and let's not determine who, but what those chairs should be. So there's 15 members for each of these 6 regional boards. So there's 90 human beings that cycle in and out every 3 years on terms that run 3 years. And I can almost recall that each chair represents a workforce developer, an economic developer, an employer, a business person, a nonprofit, an elected official, a K-12 teacher, a parent, a student, an extension officer, a librarian, and I'm falling short by a couple, but you get the idea. Community college representative, university representative, and in their orientations annually, in what we call a mega meeting of the regional boards, somebody like me stands up at the front of the room at a moment like this to say, well, welcome to that board, and your role is a solemn one. You cannot merely show up, librarian, and opine to the board leader, the manager, about what you think ought to be done. Your role is communication conduit. We're going to count on you to network with all the librarians of the entire region, and every time a meeting happens and a decision gets made, each of you in your 15 chairs were brought on to be communication conduits to your sector. So you higher ed person, you have to create a network with all the colleges and universities in your region, and likewise for all of them, so that hypothetically, everybody in the state, in every one of those sectors, knows what's going on a monthly basis. Does it work perfectly? Far from it. And it's a constant reminder that they have a serious role, and attendance is going to be a factor. You can imagine of 15. they get 12, 13 to show up at a meeting, and that's, so we built into the bylaws that it's a pretty low bar to be excused from these boards and this council, 2 meetings, and everybody serves at the pleasure of the governor and acted through me, as we have pretty deep pools of applications. And they're also told that. There's a lot of people that want that chair. You got it. Don't squander it. Lives are at stake. We use that line an awful lot. Young lives are at stake, and we're all depending on you to get this right and to maximize that real estate.
Okay. I do like how you said, had a student and a teacher represented. That's pretty great. There was a question about minimizing layers. And what they meant by the layers was, so what we found, and I've observed this as well, is you'll have one particular group that's, maybe they're higher ed, maybe it's a business, effort, or maybe it's Carl Perkins or whatever, and they'll have these little regional boards or regional groups and businessmen and different ones, and then next thing you know, the same group, the same people are being taxed with another layer, attending, answering a whole bunch of the same stuff, the same topics, and then they go to another one. So is there a way that y'all are able to kind of minimize those layers through this, the Iowa model?
It's inevitable. There'll be a lot of redundancy. There'll be a lot of overlap in responsibilities. And what concerns us most is we can kill the golden goose in terms of, I think, the business sector especially, as all of this is clearly the agenda here too, is to connect schools with the world of industry and commerce. And industry and commerce is elusive and hard to catch. And you get their attention for fleeting moments, and you better use it well, or you lose it. And there's enough bubbling up in our state, your state, so many states across the country with this most welcome STEM fever that the employer sector is getting a lot of knocks on the door. And so we want to streamline and minimize that and have singular voices connecting people. I think that came up earlier today. So this system of regional managers is one way of streamlining that cacophony of noise coming to the CEOs or the HR directors of various companies. People channel their requests through these regional STEM managers, who we take great pains to clarify to the various stakeholder groups. They're a representative of all of us. They're not merely serving the STEM council, but one of the key things I think happened early on with the STEM council is the governor and the executive committee put onto the council all these stakeholders. So for example, when the governor of Iowa holds cabinet meetings, the STEM council director is invited, and that was really bizarre at first, to be sitting next to the workforce development director and the Department of Education director and the Board of Regents director, and there's a STEM director, just created out of an executive order. But that was so critical, it turns out, because now we can hear that workforce development is doing a series of summits around the state, that's employer sector summits or whatever. And I say, well, the STEM folks should know, and let's cross-pollinate this, or some economic development activities, or some regional job fairs or whatever. So the fact that all these people are at the table, and they're all, by the way, appointed to the STEM council. So it's very hard now for something to happen in the state, and for me and my team not to know about it. If it overlaps with what we're doing, we're able to get with the people offering the service and say, let's all be in the room. Crazy example is this April 14. If you want to come up, we're having a state STEM summit, and the governor asked me, these STEM summits have been going on for 8 years, but they're getting bigger and bigger tent as our governor strives now. She says, this one, let's call it the Iowa Governor's STEM, Workforce Development, Computer Science, and Work-Based Learning Summit. Okay, we'll try to make that work. Those are 4 different entities operating through the state, but in her wisdom, challenging us to dovetail it. So we don't have 4 different summits, we have 1.
That's great. There was a question brought up in regards to, and I had a chance to speak with one of the groups and explain some of this, but this would be good for everybody to hear, is, and keep in mind, we emphasize transparency, and you emphasize that, and that's, so in regards to identifying the regional STEM center, or y'all tend to term it as a regional STEM hub, right? So we, terminology, but in regards to that, explain kind of the transparent process, just kind of an overview of how y'all actually were able to identify them. And then maybe talk about the part with how y'all created the MOU, and then what's the accountability measure. Can you explain that? So that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a crazy saga. And this is a way we didn't really have a model to go by, because I think Washington State and Massachusetts had both had regional networks ahead of us. Now, the term du jour is ecosystems, and I like that a lot better. But in both instances, they just had default hubs that existed pre-network, right? And so they inherited and ran with what they had, which works well in their instances. But in our state, here's a little inside baseball that was an intriguing drama in the early days of it. We all decided, again, there was a working group, and the working group was charged with coming up with a plan for how we can regionalize this initiative. And there were voices in that room who, when I think I was invited to go off into a smoky room somewhere and devise some alternative options for them. And people were in my ear saying, hey, when you draw the boundaries and you think of your hubs, align with the community college regions of the state, please, and let's keep it simple. And I said, got it. And then somebody else would pull me aside and go, when you make your little map, could you just abide by the workforce development regions? Right, yeah. And then somebody else would say, well, your little map should abide by the area education agencies. And on it went, with every imaginable stakeholder group extension for an agricultural college. All these different configurations. So I did literally have the great honor and privilege of bringing back to the STEM Council these configurations. I was just looking at them lately as we reconvened the hub leaders for the first time in 8 years, just the other day. And I handed it to them and said, do you remember this? When we had this bizarre series of gerrymandered hubs that carved Iowa up into all these nonsensical shapes. And I presented it to them. It was 2 pages of different variations. And of course, the community college people loved option A, and the AEAs loved option B, and the workforce developers loved C, and a debate emerged. And by the end of it, I'll never forget the president of the state's largest community college, who I respect greatly, Rob Denson, threw up his head and said, oh, for heaven's sakes, just carve it even, Stephen, 6 pieces, and let's not try to abide by anybody's boundaries. And that's what you saw earlier today. A line went straight through the middle, horizontally, and 2 lines went vertical, and we carved the state into 6 equal, more or less, geographic pieces, with the Northeast looking a lot like Louisiana. I don't know if anybody noticed that. And although that didn't represent population density, and that was people's beef, there's a lot more people in Des Moines than there are up in Northwest Iowa. And I think the sentiment was the following. I think it was our governor who at the time said, that's going to be okay, because there's been such historic disparity in spending in education. Rural Iowa has really been slighted. And she said, let's just let this play. They're all going to get an even amount of money, divided by 6 evenly. And although that's disparate by human population density, that's going to level the playing field a little bit. And we've let that play out, and it's played out quite beautifully, in fact, for rural participants who have felt in the past to be slighted. But this was a big, giant bone to throw to rural Iowa, that they're even Steven with Des Moines, and for the first time ever.
That's great. Can you explain maybe whenever y'all were able to identify the hubs, all right? And you had told me that y'all had, like, was it 8 criteria that y'all kind of did that, and then y'all had like a subcommittee, and it wasn't kind of like the smoky room. Nobody's bringing you in the smoky room to try to say, hey, pick this one or pick that one. Can you explain like how y'all actually arrived at selecting the hubs?
Yeah, it's all public record, and that's part of the delight of this job. Everything is so transparent that I sleep very well at night. But it was an RFP developed by another working group, and it had 8 or so criteria of what you should be good at and what we're looking for: cost match, some capacity, some expertise, some history of interfacing with other entities in the region. So as I mentioned earlier, some economic development offices competed, a lot of colleges competed, at least one, maybe more high schools, a couple of businesses, a couple of trade organizations. The Technology Association competed to be a hub. Each of the 6 regions had at least 2 competitors, which I'm so amazed by. And so they would fill out their proposals, and we did have a council subcommittee appointed, and they had a rubric that they developed, and it was all quite open. They scored the applications on a variety of criteria, and the winner was the one that scored the best, and it was declared, and it was posted publicly that everybody could look at each other's applications, and everybody could look at each other's scores and know why. So there weren't any bitter feelings. After the dust settled and winners were picked, one of the first tasks assigned to these regional hub managers was trek over to entity X and make them feel good, bring them under the tent. And they did, and sometimes they got appointed into the board. In a couple of instances, they partnered. You might have noticed on that map that the University of Iowa, a big beast in terms of higher ed in the state, won the Southeast Hub, but a significant community college right down the road, Kirkwood Community College, had lost out in bidding for it. But the two got together upon the decision and established a partnership so that to this day, it's a U of I Kirkwood CC consortium that is the Southeast Hub, and others have done so similarly. So I think we assuaged some hurt feelings and got everybody playing nicely together.
That's great. I like how y'all did that. There was a piece that kept getting brought up in regards to accountability as to maybe the reporting and, maybe that one STEM director, who do they report to? Do they report to the governor? Do they report to the hub? And how is their accountability if they're reporting to one or the other? How is their accountability to the other one so it can be a statewide and they don't do their own thing?
That's a very delicate ballet because each of these 6 are employees of that institution. But in the contract we struck with the 6 institutions, there's a key line that Kim Reynolds saw personally to, and that says, serves at the pleasure of the governor. Early on, she was afraid, I think there was council leadership afraid, that we wouldn't be able to control our own destiny if we don't maintain control of the employment decision on these 6 individuals. So it's in there to this day, and knock on wood, we've had, over the course of 7 years now of the network, each of those managers has been replaced once, and a couple of them now twice. It's a revolving door, but it's a happy revolving door in that these people ascend to amazing opportunities in the state's Department of Education or in administration of the local university. One was poached from her hub post to be the dean of a school at the college. I was like, come on now. But they do go nice ascension to other fields, but they're dual hired. When a position opens, me or someone from my team communicates closely with that institution. Iowa State University in the North Central is on their 3rd manager. And when we know someone's leaving, the last guy moved up to become a 4-H extension manager for all of Des Moines, so we knew we had a search to do. We spent a lot of time in Ames, Iowa for a while as we developed the ad. The ad template now exists, so it's a mere tweaking. We established a salary range, which was another tricky thing to try and get those salaries somewhat ballpark to keep happy collegial esprit de corps among these 6 people. But salary benefits vary by institution. The community colleges can't compete with the major universities salary-wise, but they're really the little engines that can. They're real close. So we conduct a search. We come to an agreeable hire. There's always a council rep on the search committees, for example, reporting back to me and my reporting back to the co-chairs. And then the person gets hired, and the supervision is also a duality. I mentioned we have a performance review document that we fill out twice a year with the regional manager. The campus-based supervisor fills it out. We fill it out. The board chair that works with them fills it out, and they themselves fill it out. So we get all these score sets, and then we make a decision about renewal. And in all the years we've been doing this, there was only one regional manager that really got sideways and had distractions and interests elsewhere that we ended up parting ways with. But knock on wood, we're all getting along great, and these are talented people. But it could get dicey if the governor decides the South Central manager needs to go. And that South Central manager is an employee of a state university, and it's very difficult for the university to excuse someone. So it hasn't happened, thankfully, but let's hope it doesn't.
And this is the works at the serves for the governor. That's the disclaimer per se. That gives it an accountability back to the governor's council. And that's normally established through an MOU describing the expectations and different things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a really critical line. I think it gave HR departments at the institutions a little bit of heartburn, indigestion, probably still does. But the one manager who didn't work out was rescued, and I'm grateful, by the institution. They gave her another assignment and thereby avoided a whole lot of drama. So we haven't had to test the system.
And I think we had spoke about this. It would kind of be, and I was in some of the breakout sessions and I mentioned, I said, obviously, Louisiana is not going to have one identical model, such as Iowa or Pennsylvania or whoever, because we're different. And a good example of this is the Governor's Council, and he is basically, Dr. Weld is basically directly under the governor for serving for that council. The way this is set up in regards to LaSTEM is through the Board of Regents, or housed under the Board of Regents as far as this position and a few things like that. So in some sense, it kind of could be at some advantages, maybe possibly if different governors take over with different expectations and things like that. I think that could probably be a benefit. Do you agree?
Definitely. The STEM Council of Iowa doesn't employ anybody. Even I'm an employee of my university, Northern Iowa, and I have a safety net of a faculty line waiting for me as a tenured professor. A lot of people don't enjoy that security, but I wouldn't have done it without, right? So yeah, it's an interesting animal to populate, to hire and populate a team that exercises the dreams, wishes of a governor's executive order created entity by which everybody's actually employed somewhere. So like I said, a lot of communication. I mentioned for the first time ever convening the supervisors from the 6 hubs a couple weeks ago and face-to-face. But we talk every month, fourth Friday of every month at 8 a.m. So we keep all issues on the table. It's a constant percolating, constant noodling. It's constant problem solving and trailblazing. But they're all in.
Okay, I have 2 final questions, and we're going to try to wrap this up. I don't want to keep you guys much longer, but these are probably 2 that you want to hear. In regards to, there was questions, is how does the Iowa model and their framework with the STEM ecosystems, how do they keep training and education? Because there tends to be some complaints, or the K through 12 is teaching this, and I'm a business owner, and the higher ed is teaching this, and they're not actually aligning to the changing business or the sector that I'm in. How do y'all try to ensure that teaching, training, and all of those things, everybody's kind of on the same page as things evolve in regards to those skill sets?
Well, the easy answer is communication. I think everybody here knows the rate of change. This was a feature of a chapter in that book you mentioned, 2017. The rate of change coming out of academia and spending a lot of time with industry people, that's exponential. I mean, when there's an innovation created, whether it's lean manufacturing or Kaizen or whatever, next thing you know, everybody in the industry is doing it. Or a new piece of software to manage data, it spreads like wildfire, or prairie fire, as I used earlier. In education, that's not the case, at least in my experience. A former high school teacher, college professor, when I do something innovative or somebody does something innovative in the school district next door, it might sit there for life because people just aren't into replicating and scaling and stealing secrets. There's a lot of local autonomy and pride. So the secret to, I think, closing the chasm, closing and keeping the chasm closed between education and industry is bridges. It sounds trite, but the more teachers cross the street in the summers to spend with industry, the more algebra teachers and their students collaborate on a project needed by a local hospital or manufacturer, the more they all mingle one morning a month in an economic development / education community breakfast, the better. These are popping up all around the state. I heard it mentioned here too, and these are really awesome. They're almost county by county in Iowa, and we're just trying to make them happen. There's a lot of lunch and learns, and there's a lot of community breakfasts happening where either a school superintendent or a local CEO or a chamber director or a mayor starts hosting these breakfasts, and it happened in the southeast corner of our state. We heard about it. We put it on steroids. We put it out through our managers that everybody in every county in the state should be doing this. And it's a room smaller than this often, and they meet at a local cafe, and they have these monthly chats about what's the latest in education, what's the latest in industry, what can we do for you, what can you do for us. So again, communication.
That's great. And probably last but not least, can you please explain how your dog... No, I'm just joking. Make sure everybody's awake out there. Can you explain the funding model in regards to how, where does the funding come from? y'all provide full funding? Is it cost sharing? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I sure can.
And one other thing is, if a STEM hub is identified, are they permanently identified, or is it an annual review?
Yeah, not a good question.
Okay.
I can remember when we first got off the ground, I was hanging out with Alabama people, Brenda Terry and Steve Ricks, and they were the STEM of Alabama. They launched this Alabama Math Science Initiative. AmSty, I love their accents, you know. In Iowa, that's AmSty. And then Washington State, hanging out with Caroline King at the time, and Caroline and Steve Ricks says, yeah, we get a $13 million annual appropriation to run AmSty. I was like, oh my gosh. Caroline King, we get $60 million a year from Microsoft. Arkansas with Anthony Owens, teens of millions per year. And I thought, how on earth are we going to keep up with any of this in our little state? But we did, by some miracle, get a $3 million investment the first year, which was a crazy, amazing, humbling thing for the legislature to come through on the governor's executive order. That, I'm so pleased to say, is now at $6 million. And this in an era of exceedingly tight budgets for agricultural states who are really getting squeezed right now, to boost our appropriation last year from 5.4 to 6.4. To give you a context for that, draconian cuts were being made to geriatric care and preschool and all these heart-tugging cuts being made that I was almost sheepish about. STEM got increased, but I thought, but we're gonna earn this and own it and pay back some of those folks who were getting squeezed by amping up our efforts in early childhood STEM, for example. So we're now at 6.4 million a year that I almost have to pause and take a deep breath on that, on the citizen investment in what we're doing and the sacred trust that we've got in us. And I remind the team daily about this sacred trust and not to blow it. But
that is a good makeup of different programs and resources provided across the state. In regards to like the base of like funding and actually having the 6 hubs function, what explain that?
The hubs each get $74,000 a year, and that's operation charge, and that's asked at a 50% cost match. Each of those institutions brings the other $74,000. So far, we're keeping it under between the pay of the manager, full-time salary professional, and several have doctorates. So they're not cheap people, and their benefits, and their travel, and their technology, and their communications needs, their travel, their professional development.
That's all part of the MOU,
the 74K.
The cost sharing agreement, right?
That's right. So that has raised, I think it started out at 69,000 6 years ago. So we're trying to keep up, and every month when we convene these supervisors, or every year when budget time comes around, we say, are you good with the 74? Are we able to match and keep it at that? Are we meeting the needs of the manager at that rate? And so far, so good.
And the last thing is, are the hubs, once they're identified, is it permanent? Or
That's right, sorry. They were all signed on with 3-year agreements. And an interesting thing happened after 3 years. This would have been 2015. They were coming up to expire. And so we went before the STEM Council and had done a lot of huddling with the managers and their hub institution supervisors prior to that. And the prospect now of reopening this to RFP sent shudders through their spines. It had such a disruptive prospect that the manager now embedded at ISU or at Iowa or at Drake or at Southwest Community College might have to up and move across the region because somebody outbid them this time. Was so disruptive. So we packaged a pitch to our council and took it in and made this pitch to them. Let's not open this up again, but let's hold these people accountable. What else should we ask them to be doing? And that's when they said, we need to redouble your efforts to make sure that if we're not going to open this up, that you make sure you're getting around to all the other would-be competitors and bringing them under the tent. So we now have that as part of the rubric that every year they report to us. The other higher ed institutions, the other industry partners, the other technology associations, are they all feeling part of the mix? Because we don't want them outside the tent. We want them under the tent. And so they did a renewal in 2015 with that agreement that they're going to be measured now on this and other tactics. And I think they just got renewed again. Oh, I'm sorry. We renewed them at 2015 for 5 years. So we got a little ways to go before we revisit this. But it doesn't look like we're going to dismantle the system now that's embedded itself.
Getting a bit uptight, huh? Well, Dr. Jeff Weld, I want to say thanks on behalf of everybody that came here. We valued your experience. I know that everybody I spoke to, in fact, I was talking to you earlier and people coming up to you, man, I really loved that. That was great. And I just want to say thank you. And guys, just so y'all know, Dr. Jeff Weld, when we first started talking, and he said I had him on speed dial, that kind of isn't a joke. But whenever I'd asked him, I said, hey, how did y'all do this? And what did you do? The greatest guy, he just took that packet and sent it to me. Hey, here's our framework. Hey, here's an example of an MOU between us and one of the STEM hubs. Here's all this different stuff. Just a phenomenal guy. And that was why I wanted him to be here and be able to explain and express and the value and benefit of what they did. I believe it's really a beautiful thing, and I believe it's something that's going to totally transform the state of Louisiana in a very positive way. If one thing could come out of all of this that would be just so phenomenal, it'd be the communication component across the state. I think that alone is going to be huge.
Well, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's our responsibility to pay it forward, and I'm pleased to do so. I hope it's been useful.
And I want to say one last thing. Thanks to you guys and gals for staying here. We are recording this, so we'll be able to share it, and we'll try to post it on the website. So the ones, I know some of them did have to go and leave and do different things, and we didn't do door prizes at the end. So, our food. So I guess everybody got to go. So anyway, that was some of this. I do want to say, I don't know, Dr. Susanna Craig over there. I want to say thank you for all the phenomenal things. Listen, y'all wouldn't be here if it wouldn't have been for Dr. Craig and her help and everything. Miss Linda, Miss Melissa, all of the Board of Regents people who volunteered and helped out. I don't know if y'all noticed the VEX Robotics and the First Robotics and all the students that were there. Those were all volunteers. Central High and the jazz band. Did y'all like the jazz band? That was pretty classy. I enjoyed it. I thought it had a nice flavor to it. And the River Center group here was phenomenal. They anytime we had an issue, they just helped out. So kudos to those guys. You see them, tell them thanks on all of this. But anyway, I just want to say that thanks to everybody that helped out. This was not a one-person effort in any way. And I think it was a great success. Really looking forward to the things that are coming up. November 20th, we're going to be having our LaSTEM quarterly meeting. We're going to have some action items coming out of that meeting that we plan to hopefully have some really good stuff moving forward to present back to the council in February of next year. That'll be our first quarterly meeting. So keep an eye out. Be on the lookout. Also, I'm going to send y'all a survey either tonight or tomorrow to kind of get y'all's feedback. Please, we welcome your feedback in regards to the event and what you'd like to see us improve on next year. Thanks, and God bless.